is thinking if there is hint of a recession, they're likely to cut, and quite aggressively, not just 50 basis points.
Well, yeah, that's quite a call, actually. But, when did that happen? We've got three central banks. We've got the Bank of England, and then the ECB and the Fed, as we've been talking about. What are the separate narratives here?
So, Vishal, that's an excellent question. I would say that, markets grappling with three different narratives when it comes to growth and inflation going forward. Two, we just talked about, sort of this recession scenario and the soft landing where we have, inflation coming down without a massive hit to growth. And the other scenario out there is the scenario where growth actually reaccelerates.
Or that inflation reaccelerates, and that's what
reaccelerates, exactly.
Yeah, that's what Whitman was saying. But out of the last 13 Fed hiking cycles, the average time in between the last hike and the first cut is 5 months. 5 months. And in 6 of the 13 cycles, the time was 2 months or less. So I think that investors would be wise to think about that before pillaring the bond market for suggesting a cut later this year, and indeed HSBC's full 1 percentage point.
Exactly, and I think if you think about the fact that bond markets are sort of reflecting probabilities, then the part of the market that doesn't expect any cuts would expect things to stay flat, whereas the HSBC sort of scenarios would expect a cut, and assigning probabilities, the weighted average is actually what the swap curves are reflecting.
All right, so let's have a look at what all this how it plays out on markets. I mean, we've had so much euphoria at the start of this year, equity-wise. We know the risks to all of that becoming a damp squib, i.e. a real recession, of course, also geopolitics. But would actually a turnaround for the dollar and strength for the dollar also be a big, how can I say, headwind?
Absolutely. I mean, that was the scenario all of last year, Rashad. You're absolutely right. If the dollar takes off again like it did most of 2022, that would be a growth dampener globally. We've seen that happen again and again in the past. And in the last 3 months or so, we've had dollar correct about 10%. I'm talking the DXY here, which has really helped the sentiment globally. We've seen the rally in the developed market, ex-US and EM, far surpass any of the enthusiasm you've seen in the US markets. And dollar's been a huge factor in that.
So we'll get the jobs data this week. Now, if we get a negative print on jobs, seems unlikely, but it's possible. I'm sure it would embarrass the Fed right after a hike, but how do you think the market would respond?
Oh, that's a very interesting question, Brian. I think I would say that the bond market would, the Treasury and the sort of safer parts of the bond market would rally hard, because that would price out any more hikes, because a recession seems more likely. The soft data has been calling for that, but we haven't seen it in any of the hard data. The equity picture is a little bit mixed. So far the correlation has been that both equities and bonds have moved quite together, and this is the one scenario where when we see growth downgrade, I think equities might not do quite as well as the bonds might.
So this brings us nicely to talk about whether you think that this momentum for equities can continue now, and if so, is it time to be loading up on risk, or is it time to probably take stock, pardon the pun?
So our positioning is actually sort of what I would call barbelled. We love taking risk in emerging markets at this point. That's one area where we see quite a scope for growth recovery. So EM has done quite well, Rashad, in the last 2-3 months already, but most of it has been sort of multiple expansion in anticipation for better earnings growth and better economic growth. And if that does come through, then I would say there is more room in EM markets for more repricing of a better growth scenario. The other side of it is we also own a lot of treasuries, because I think the recession risk is real also.
It's interesting how you read China, so you can give me that, because year on year and year to date kind of squishy, but last week pretty good.
Yeah, I've never seen our China analyst as bullish as of late, and really the new year is starting policy-wise quite nicely. There is some impact finally of all the property development measures they had taken last year. Some of them are bearing fruit now.